obviously one of the challenges is technology in this new age. All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Great. Hey, thanks for being here. So we have Jonathan Lindsay, he's Vice President of Enrollment Management at Goucher College. It's a private coeducational college in Towson, Maryland, right? And I believe you have, what, 1,350 undergrads there and about 1,000 graduate students?
That's correct.
Excellent. So what we want to do is today have a conversation about what's the impact of the coronavirus epidemic on college recruitment, kind of particularly as probably the previous week here you've spent fighting fires and getting the college emptied out of students and dealing with just the here and now. You will start to look at forward and see what is going to take place going forward as you start to look at recruiting again in the future. So that's framing up how we wanted to look at this. What I guess wanted to start out with, the first question would be, from your perspective, what specific area do you think colleges and universities were least prepared in tackling the corona epidemic?
I think probably the corona epidemic. I mean, I don't know that we had imagined anything on this sort of scale where we were going to see a campus having to empty out basically within a week, where we were going to have to move from an in-person instruction model or delivery model to a virtual delivery model. And a staff that, again, now all has to work remotely. I mean, we have a small handful of essential employees on campus, but essentially everyone on my team is working remotely and had to do that within a very short period of time. So this was certainly nothing that we had planned for, and I doubt there are many institutions that could have imagined that everything was going to get shut down in the way it has in such a short period. So I think we were caught out by the epidemic itself. At this point, with students gone, with faculty now set up to teach online, our first step on the admission side was to completely rethink our on and off campus offerings as virtual events. And we were lucky. We've got some great folks on the team conversant in this area in terms of the technology that we've needed to support us. And we've managed a fairly seamless transition where we now have essentially campus visits, the ability to offer the equivalent of a campus visit in a virtual arena.
So adding to that, that's actually the next question I had was, most colleges and universities and high schools and grade schools for that matter have been forced to go online, whether they ever really were wanting to or not during this pandemic. What do you see the long-term effects, as we see the flight to a digital world?
Well, I think, while I certainly wouldn't have wished this on any of us, it has forced us to think differently, which we probably should have been doing, quite some time ago. So this has been, a kick in the rear end for sure, and will force us to better understand technologies that are now available to us that perhaps we weren't exploring previously. And so from that perspective, I'm pleased. I mean, I would not have been imagining a virtual admissions campus event in March 2020 were it not for this. And I really should have been, because we certainly, in terms of access, convenience, customer service, we certainly should have had that as an option in place for quite some time, and we frankly didn't. Now, maybe there are other institutions that are further along in this process, but when all this settles down, I am sure that some of what we've adopted we will continue on with, and some of the old ways of delivering messaging we may still find are the best and return to some of those. But I think it'll definitely move us along that continuum of improved processes, services, etc.
So, kind of following along that lines, where do you see called the digital evolution? Is it where will it help your recruitment process, and where might it hinder it?
I think we really have not presented ourselves digitally. I mean, when we thought of how we present ourselves digitally, I guess we think about the website, we think about videos. We had not imagined student panels. We'd not imagined faculty panels. We'd not imagined demonstrating online education for our prospective students sitting in, wherever, Nome, Alaska. So I think all of those are good things. I think as much progress as this is forcing us to adopt on the admission side, on the recruitment side, my concerns are the health of the institution overall, and not just Goucher College, but higher ed and perhaps specifically small liberal arts institutions. It doesn't matter if you've totally transitioned your admissions operation to be able to continue on in this new world. But if your institution is failing financially, it hasn't done you much good. So my concerns now are not so much about whether we can do our work in admissions. It's how are we as an industry going to survive given the high rates of unemployment we expect, given the reduced value of our endowments, given the reduced capacity for giving, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
It's so good segue. I'm kind of looking at next question on enrollment impact, and it's been said that welcome to the new normal. I've heard said, and with regards to life with post-pandemic, where do you see the new normal for college recruitment, admissions efforts in terms of goals, metrics, and enrollment numbers?
If I knew the answer to that question, Jeff, I don't think I'd be on this call right now.
It's an opinion, though. Maybe we're all searching.
We are, interestingly, just getting ready for an executive committee meeting with our board tomorrow, and this has been, no pun intended, the $64,000 question. And, really our solution to that, short term at this point, has just been to create some ranges of impact and to quantify those in terms of lost revenue. Not yet understanding where within this range we may fall. So for us, we are a residential college. Our scenarios are broken into a couple where we assume that we can resume business as normal to some extent in the fall, meaning that we will greet students at orientation mid-August, and will continue to deliver most of our content in a classroom. The second set of scenarios assumes that coronavirus is continuing on, and we will not be able to do that, and we will need to greet and onboard a class in a virtual environment. And then within both those large scenarios, obviously we've got a number of models within that. So that's kind of where we're at. I don't know that as an industry yet, we've got any consensus around what the impact might be. Again, I would say, though, that I'm worrying about what rainy day funds institutions have to get us from point A to point B. And I think that's going to be the biggest struggle. It's not only what is the impact going to be, but once we understand that, do institutions have the ability to survive that and hang around? Are they going to be able to hang around until things return to some semblance of normalcy?
Yeah, for certainly it's going to be a bigger challenge for some institutions that were already kind of looking at a really rough year. So
and again, this is on top of existing struggles. So I mean, it's not as though I mean, there were concerns within the higher ed profession certainly before coronavirus. A changing population, a smaller population, questions about the value of a degree, alternative free tuition programs. I mean, there were a lot of problems that we were certainly aware of before this. This is simply exacerbated or compounded all of that, I guess is the right word.
So just to kind of one more thing on the kind of financial impact, we've got a survey going right now where we're trying to get, obviously they're all opinions at this point in time as people kind of sort through their own institution situations. But, be interested from a high level to kind of get your feeling of what Goucher's looking at, where you see the challenges financially.
Well, I think we're fairly fortunate at Goucher in the sense that, well, first of all, I think the leadership team jumped on this fairly quickly, and so we've gone through a series of decisions, a decision-making process that I think we can feel pretty good about. We're also fortunate in that we have a decent endowment, and obviously one doesn't want to tap into that, but at least it's there, which is more than can be said for some institutions. But the worst case scenarios are really huge. We would then be forced, I mean, on the revenue side, we would then be forced to look hard at the expense side. And all of a sudden, I mean, I would guess on most campuses, personnel represents the single biggest expense, and all of a sudden, the only way to reduce expenses in a meaningful way would be to look at the employment base, which is not something that any of us wants to tackle. But again, given that we have a safety net, and assuming that if we had to, we could be aggressive on the expense side, I can imagine that we would survive. But it's a bleak picture, and you wonder, as you're going through that, what is the impact on the quality of the product that you're providing? Not only are you able to actually teach these people, but what is the mood of employees, of staff and faculty when all of these terrible things are happening all around them? So I mean, I think there are huge concerns out there.
Excellent. Yeah, totally agreed. So I'm curious, another area, obviously this is a global issue, and most of our audience in universities and colleges have international presence now on their campuses. I'm sure that's true of Goucher. I'm just curious where you see the challenges and impact in terms of international recruitment and those students coming or not coming to class.
Well, for us, this is a two-way street. So Goucher College actually was the first college in the nation to ensure that all of its students studied abroad. So when this situation hit, we had a large number of US students all over the world in different circumstances, different locations, different issues. And so Our global education team has spent a great deal of time reaching out to them. Again, each of them representing an individual circumstance that we've had to work through. In some cases, students have come home. In others, they've stayed. What does that mean for finishing up a semester? This is a requirement for us. A study abroad experience is a requirement for us. So, what does that mean when your experience was truncated halfway through? You're right, though. The other issue then is on the incoming student side. And we've already had a conversation about a scenario where maybe we are able to operate as normal in terms of students, an incoming class coming to campus, but maybe those international students are not going to make it because they still have to deal with visa issues, with embassies that are shut, all sorts of obstacles, the inability to access tests maybe. So we are already working with the provost to see whether we can imagine a model where maybe our international students would have to join us virtually, whereas our domestic students would actually be on campus. So I think we need to, again, continue to think creatively about how we're going to do that. But so much of what we talk about as a college campus right now is the community and the conversations. Many of those happen obviously outside a traditional classroom and are harder to facilitate in a virtual world. This whole conversation around the world of, yes, we're more connected digitally, and yet people feel lonelier and more disconnected than ever before. So how do we begin to address those issues? I don't have the answer to that yet.
Yeah, we're all, I think, searching for that just in our own lives as well.
I have a follow-up question, actually, Jeff, if you don't mind inserting in. So my question is, when you are talking about international population doing the virtual classes for them, do you think you can still charge the same tuition, or is it going to impact your revenue because it's a very different model, online versus them coming to your state? A lot of these students are motivated by the fact that they are going to United States. Now, if it is online, I can take that on edX.
Yep, no, I hear what you're saying. I think when I was describing the scenario we're exploring right now, we have to date imagined it just as a temporary fix. In other words, that by spring semester, once we're up and running again, they would join us here on campus. Your point, though, about revenue is a good one. We, along with many other colleges and universities, have chosen to refund our current students room and board for the second half of the semester. I mentioned earlier that as we try to model out the impact of this, one scenario has us as an online institution in the fall. Again, we lose room and board revenue in that scenario. So, and that is an important piece of our revenue. We're fortunate. We have a significant bed count here, and have invested in updating residence halls, building new residence halls. All of those plans were sort of based on the assumption that beds would be filled, in order to fund construction and so on and so forth. The debt service is the same regardless of whether we have somebody in those beds or whether we don't. So yeah, there are all sorts of challenges here, both revenue wise and what is the experience you're trying to sell.
Yeah, thank you.
So final question here. So let's, looking forward, we're still in a mode where colleges are shut down, high schools are shut down. And right now people looking back on this video are going to know that we're still dealing with this at this point in the midst of it. And I think wondering, one, you guys are working on how to get your existing class in and make sure that you retain as many as possible. But, looking forward, when is the right time to start your recruiting efforts for next year's class?
I think in that regard, we haven't really stopped, and I don't think we're gonna stop. We have, our initial, I'll just cite an example. We, like many colleges, typically host admitted student events around the country. So we were supposed to be in New York Thursday night of last week. We transitioned that to a virtual event. And at the end of the call, we kind of asked the students, how are they feeling? How are they doing? They were so appreciative that we were out there reaching out to them and delivering content and interacting with them and trying to answer their questions. My takeaway was we need to be doing more of this. I'm fortunate here. Our faculty is very supportive of the admissions team, the recruitment efforts. A number of them have approached us willing to do individual outreach or to set up a panel from the humanities area or whatever. So I think we're just going to do more. There is going to be a need as people remain sequestered for content, for something to stimulate them. We're doing this at the graduate level too. So some of our low residency programs are now creating just sort of topic-based conversations around, obviously that match the interests of the students. But what are the current trends in historic preservation? How are arts administrators dealing with the fact that museums and art galleries are shut down or whatever? So I think we're going to keep talking and keep presenting the college, recognizing that ultimately some of our audience may not be in a position to join us even if they wanted to, but that shouldn't stop us from laying out the value proposition, as it were. I'm more convinced than ever that a liberal arts institution can provide an experience that prepares students for a complex world. Whether we're talking climate change, we're talking pandemic, we're talking the isolation issue that we referenced earlier. There is a need for well-educated, well-rounded, erudite individuals who are able to think creatively and address some of these challenges head on. So, as I say, we're going to keep doing what we're doing without burying our heads in the sand, recognizing the realities around us. But I think there is room for a message from an institution like ours, more so now than perhaps there was previously.
That's excellent. Great insight. I really appreciate it. Hey, I want to thank you very much for your time today. This has been insightful, and you really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day. I know it's been hectic, but I think this is great information for everybody out there. So again, thank you for.
I would like to add just one more thing, Jeff. Again, for me, not that I wanted any of this to happen, but I think for me it is accelerating. I hope it accelerates our thinking about who we are as institutions, what we are doing as educational institutions. We have been probably way too removed from what's actually going on in the world in some cases. Even thinking through the admissions process, you and I had a brief conversation earlier about the need to move beyond how we've traditionally looked at an applicant. So historically, and again, I think Goucher's moved away or is moving away a little bit from this, but historically, we looked at a GPA, we looked at a test score, we either did or did not read an essay that was submitted, a letter of recommendation that was submitted, and we made a decision. Well, I think that we need to move beyond that, and again, for me, those test scores and that GPA doesn't necessarily get at what I'm really looking for. I'm looking for someone who's curious, who's interesting, who's interested, who is resilient, who, for us in particular, has concerns around social justice, interest in global education. I mean, these are the things that I really would like to be able to ascertain in an applicant pool. And I'm sort of hoping that all of this prompts us as an industry, as a country, to perhaps think more broadly about some of these challenges. And I'm not suggesting that there aren't, I'm not pretending for a moment that Goucher is the only one looking at this, but as I said earlier, I think this is a little bit of a kick in the rear, and maybe not, and maybe a bit needed. So I'll end on kicking in the rear.
Exactly where we are coming from at Cirkled In. I think you and I talked about a portfolio-based admissions, and
yep.
That Ritu founded this company, and it's based on really giving students the opportunity to showcase themselves beyond just, like you said, their SAT score and their grade point average. That just is one metric, and there's certainly more about people you can learn, and that's our mission as well. So I appreciate you realizing that.
Yeah, and Goucher, Goucher has given a nod to this. We, a number of years ago, introduced the Goucher video application, which suggested that there was a methodology of presenting yourself as a candidate beyond the traditional application process. I think, frankly, we've got work to do in that area as we think through, again, how can we take and improve upon that concept? So work for us to do for sure.
So one thing I would like to add, actually, first of all, whatever you said about SAT, that's music to my ears. As a parent, I have a junior in high school right now, and she's starting to look at the colleges, and it's interesting that how she's evaluating colleges, and how colleges are looking at candidates. So it's really good to know that how a lot more colleges are going into making SAT, ACT optional. And I think one thing what COVID has done, which is a little bit good in this whole process, that a lot more colleges are thinking of dropping SAT, ACT now. In fact, MIT came out last week and they said they are going to drop subject SAT for this year, and they will reevaluate for 2021 class. And universities like MIT, you could never imagine them doing it. Even UC system is looking at dropping out SAT, ACT. So I think it goes very much in line with what you are saying. And second thing I would like.
And make sure that you have your daughter add Goucher College to her list.
So that was another thing I was going to say. One thing that this pandemic has done to the society, of course, there are a lot of bad things, but one good thing it has done, I think it has brought Gen Z and the older generations a little bit together. Everything you talked about, Gen Z, like my kids, I have two of them, the way they think, it's so different than I grew up thinking. Climate change, global justice, equity, and who doesn't have lunch in my school, who doesn't have laptop and online instructions that I'm getting, but they are not. It's amazing to see how global citizen they are, how social citizen they are. So I absolutely agree with you when you say liberal arts colleges can teach those skills. It doesn't matter whether you are a doctor or an engineer or a rocket scientist, you need to have these basic skills. And I think liberal arts colleges can add a lot of value in our society with that form.
It's a challenge, but maybe in the end, as you said, this will be good for us. I mean, we often now get, as do the high school college counselors, you know, that they have parents that ask them, what degree will lead to which job? They want a linear trajectory from a major in a college to a job. That's not how it works. I mean, it's trite to say, you know, liberal arts institutions prepare students for the jobs of the future that we do not yet know. I mean, I've heard that a million times, but there is an element of truth to that. You know, again, creativity, collaboration, communication skills, data analysis. We've just created a new major in data analytics. You know, you don't need to know necessarily how to do math now. You need to be able to take the data that is being produced by your spreadsheet or whatever it is and be able to say, well, what is this telling me? So again, a number of the new degrees that we're launching here are much more interdisciplinary in nature, are much more applied in nature. And again, you know, I'm using these terms which I don't like using, but those soft skills that we talk about, there's real truth to that, as valuable skills that employers are looking for. So I've gone way over my time now. I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah, no, it's been terrific. So I think at this point we'll end our interview. Again, thank you for that. We appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. It was really pleasant conversation, and I'm really glad to hear everything you shared. Not only as you know, somebody who has great vision for Cirkled In, but also as a parent who have 2 kids in the pipeline coming into, you know, higher education system. It's amazing to see, like, if you look at the jobs, the thing that you just touched upon, the jobs of future, we are building driverless cars. We are building vacation to Mars. We are building things that we never thought and we have never done before. So we can't just keep teaching them math and science and expect them to be successful in the future. It has to be leadership. It has to be innovation, creativity, problem solving, critical thinking, whatever you want to call it. And I think a lot of higher ed institutions are thinking from that angle. As an example, one of very reputed private college in Boston I was talking to, they are launching a major which is human-centered engineering. So it's not so much engineering, but it's more human-centered. That's the focus. And they are looking at Cirkled In as a application platform, because SAT is not going to tell them who wants to do engineering to solve global human problems, which is their mission with this program. So it's interesting to see how higher ed is going in that direction and looking at it. Of course, it's a smaller percentage. I will also say that, like, not every college is thinking that way. So,
well, it's different if you're, you know, a 50,000 student public institution too. I mean, we have the luxury. I mean, we will see somewhere between 2,500, 3,000 apps. That's a manageable number to be able to think a little bit outside the box. And separate from this, I would love to hear more about the company and understand more about what it is that you're doing and thinking about.
If you have
you know,
time,
I had begun this conversation on campus before all of this. Again, feeling like we needed to rejigger our Gaucho video application, and we've seen some declining numbers there, and I wasn't particularly excited or satisfied about the entries this year, the submissions this year. And I would like to use it, as they say, as a tool, as a stepping stone, maybe to completely rethinking our admissions process. You know, maybe we do some sort of test with a smaller group and work through some of the kinks. I mean, presumably on our end, we would need to create some sort of rubric where somehow we're scoring or evaluating whatever it is that the student is presenting through this portfolio opportunity. But again, I've come from an art school background primarily. I'm not an artist myself, but have worked at a number of art schools where it's actually the portfolio and a conversation with the student that has proven way more important in determining a student's ultimate success at these institutions than test scores or a GPA. And I made the mistake of having 4 children. You did much better than me in only having 2, but
I'm in between you both. I have 3.
All right. Well, so having had 4, I realized that there are different students, some who do better on tests and some who don't, some who do better with the GPA versus some that don't. So, again, looking for new criteria, I guess, is something I'm interested in.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got some time, we'd love to show you a demo of what we're doing. Also, before we get too far down the road, I know you have your meeting tomorrow. So, one, I have very dirty raw results from the survey that you took that are actually pretty interesting. So I'll send that over to you. Bear in mind that I've just put them together ugly. They're not beautiful marketing looking material. And then secondly, we started up we have this large student audience, obviously. And I think a comment of like, they're looking for things to do. We're getting a tremendous feedback on it, but it's basically polling them about and I looked at most of them are 12th graders, of the things that are concerning about them at this point in terms of, how they're dealing with colleges, just some different things. I'll send over, again, very raw data, but there's some interesting things like how is one of the questions we asked was about how the best way for schools to contact you, and the results were a little surprising to me. Online versus virtual, that was a little surprising to me. So I'll send that over. I think it might be insightful for your meeting.
I appreciate that. The other thing that, while we focus today obviously on admissions and the financial health of these institutions, one of the things that we're working on just as hard as we have been in trying to move our recruitment efforts to a virtual world, we're also on the retention side looking at how we can support students in this new online environment, sitting in homes that they probably weren't imagining that they would be sitting in right now, dealing for our seniors with the frustration of not being with their friends up to and through graduation. So, outreach there and how to support them. And we too have done a little bit of polling of our own students to begin to try to ascertain where the pain points are, and what we can do either individually to reach out to a student or more institutionally. 3/4 of the population are citing a problem with X. Can we then provide some sort of programming or intervention that would help people figure out what happens when the Wi-Fi goes out or whatever, whatever their problem is.
As we just experienced before we started.
Yes, exactly. So we're, that's another piece of this whole mix, because obviously, as we look at our bottom line back to the finances, whether we see a drop in recruitment or retention, both are equally problematic looking at it just from a financial perspective. But again, these are human beings and we want to try and provide them the best experience that we can given the circumstances that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, well, I promise I'll send those over after our call today.
Perfect, thank you.
Ritu, you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, this is a